Hi, I'm Doug McLennan. I'm the editor of artsjournal.com and one of the perpetrators of the new Seattle website Post Alley. And this is our first attempt at a video cast. And today I'm talking with Carol Williams, who is one of our writers. Carol?
Hi, I'm a former correspondent for the Associated Press and for the Los Angeles Times. I spent 30 years abroad covering everything from Russia to German reunification to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Chechnya, Ukraine. So I'm mostly pontificating from the Pacific Northwest these days.
Right. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the story you wrote for us last weekend on shutting suddenly down of Russia. Russia had been saying they hadn't really had much of a significant coronavirus problem at all. I think last week they were reporting, 250 cases or something? And people were starting to ask why. And then all of a sudden, Putin suddenly shut down the country, in effect, and the numbers doubled overnight. Can you kind of explain what you think was going on?
Well, Putin was taking a pretty similar stance to Trump early on, or up until about a week ago, claiming that, this was being, exaggerated abroad and that they weren't having any problem or very much of a problem. He went to visit a hospital in Moscow last Tuesday and showed up in this full hazmat suit with the mayor of Moscow and the chief doctor at that hospital. Putin, after he, visited with a couple of patients, went with the chief doctor, and after he'd taken off his hazmat gear, he was photographed by the Russian state-controlled media shaking hands with the doctor, who has since been tested positive for coronavirus and is in self-quarantine. The mayor of Moscow has kind of taken the lead on this, which is unusual because Putin typically wants to handle any crisis so that he can, get credit for it when it's all resolved. He did yesterday extend the term of the no work, they call it a non-working week. It was supposed to just last until this Saturday coming up tomorrow, I guess. They've extended it now to the end of April, and they've gotten pretty serious in their efforts to keep people who have tested positive but don't need hospitalization to stay home. Moscow has a pretty extensive network of facial recognition technology hung on street lamps and telephone poles all around the city. And I just watched a report that they have detected more than 500 people who are breaking their quarantine, going out to party or something, and charge them and find them with putting the public at risk. So they're cracking down, and I think they're taking it more seriously than some other countries.
So this sounds to me like a very familiar story. This was the problem in China, which for weeks didn't admit that there was a problem, and then suddenly there was. They were forced into it, really, because social media was starting to make a really big deal about it. Same thing happened in Russia, where social media sites were reporting already 20,000 cases. And at some point, I guess it becomes hard to deny. Over the weekend, Orban in Hungary essentially shut down the government and made himself emperor. And then you've got Brazil, which is Bolsonaro seems to be denying that there's any problem at all, and so what is it about these leaders that their first reaction is to deny it? That seems like a very short-sighted kind of strategy, because as it blows up, it's impossible to deny, and then you get blamed.
Well, it's a knee-jerk reaction of authoritarian leaders. They don't want to look like they are not in control of a problem that's affecting more liberal countries. And, you know, especially in the communist ruled countries, or countries that were under communist rule for decades in recent memory, they create a system where the people who are responsible for bringing to authorities' attention problems like the spread of an infectious disease, they fear losing their jobs or their, you know, their positions in the economic structure. So they don't report it. You know, they try to hide it. And when you can do this at the local level sometimes, but when you have a pandemic like coronavirus, or, you know, an international ecological disaster like the Chernobyl accident in 1986, when the Soviets spent the first 72 hours trying to hide this from the rest of the country and the rest of the world. But, you know, the radiation cloud was circling the globe, and, you know, the other countries, you know, the neighboring countries were the ones who finally forced Moscow to admit that there'd been this tremendous accident, and, you know, a lot of countries sent help to help contain it. It doesn't make sense, because by hiding it, it gets worse, and then you really have something you have to account for in the end. And I think China did kind of get serious about this sometime in January, but in December, when it first broke out, they were arresting people who were talking about this on social media, or the doctor at the main hospital in Wuhan who was, you know, going on video, you know, presentations saying that, you know, people were going to die, that this was really dire.
Right.
And he was, you know, taken in and held for days. And
And
he's the one who,
subsequently died himself.
yes.
Yeah. In a way, disasters are the friends of dictators, because you can mobilize everybody, all of the norms go out the window, and you can use it as an excuse to reset and say, oh, we have to do added surveillance, oh, we have to take away, you know, the election, or et cetera, whatever it is that you want to do. So you almost, in a way, sort of expect dictators or strongmen to embrace or look for or accelerate disasters where they can, because it's a useful tool.
I think this is a disaster too far. I mean, nobody can contain the outbreak just by diktat. You can't, you know, sign an executive order and make it go away. And the longer these authoritarian leaders refuse to acknowledge that it's getting more out of hand by ignoring it or denying it, the harder it's going to be to ever get it contained. I'm really worried about Brazil most. I mean, that is a populous country where people live very densely, and I mean, everything I've seen coming out of there shows that there's very little public concern. The health minister has taken on Bolsonaro, but
and some of the cities have also, but
yes,
Bolsonaro has cracked down on them as well.
but they're going to need, you know, the national focus on the favelas, the slums in the big cities that are just cheek to jowl people who have jobs where they are still going out in, you know, crowded factories and farms, and it's got to be getting out of control. They are reporting more cases now. I mean, I think when I mentioned them in the piece I did last weekend, they only had, like, you know, 100 and some cases. But this morning they reported, or the Johns Hopkins graphic that has been tracking this globally, they reported 8,165. And when I just checked about half an hour ago, it's gone up by almost 1,000.
Yeah.
So it's 9,056. And, you know, the deaths were proportionately accelerating. Philippines is another area. I mean, they have only reported 136 deaths, and that's another country where people live very densely populated, and their
And now
healthcare
there's
system.
and now there's some question about whether the Chinese numbers, which haven't gone up for a month now, and which they have claimed to have contained it and tamped down. There's some considerable question about whether those numbers are actually accurate.
And also, there are other countries in Asia where they legitimately had the virus under control. Singapore and South Korea and Taiwan. And my former colleagues at the LA Times today reported from Singapore that there's been a new rebound of the virus cases, not to the degree that they experienced earlier, but that they had to impose new restrictions to, corral everybody back under the, social distancing and other efforts to stop it.
It's all rather depressing.
Yes.
I've been reading a number of analysts who think that this may be the final nail in the coffin of globalism. That the rising tides of nationalism around the world over the last few years have gotten to a certain point, but now an even greater impetus to draw in and really think about things nationalistically rather than as a global system.
I'm not quite that pessimistic, because I think these leaders who are currently or were earlier using this to enhance their power and, make them, more likely to get elected because they think their supporters, are applauding the moves they're making that give precedence to preserving the economic strength of the countries over the health of the people. I think it's going to force a renewed effort and renewed cooperation. Even Trump and Xi yesterday both made little, baby steps toward calling off this ridiculous, name calling and, provocation that how is this helpful amid a global disaster?
Well, on the other hand, a G7 meeting a few weeks ago was kind of a disaster.
Because
Go ahead.
because Pompeo was insisting that that as a group, as a global economic, brain trust, that we call it the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus instead of the coronavirus. And again, how does this address any of the huge problems that everybody in the world has right now, getting into a name calling spat?
Right, and then a G20 meeting to figure out some courses of action also likewise resulted in nothing. And so you kind of wonder, where is the leadership coming in what will obviously be necessary? Virus doesn't see borders.
Exactly.
Where is the international leadership going to come from to figure out how to deal with this?
Well, one thing that gives me hope is that, it's now clear to most people that the medical supplies, the protective gear and clothing, we've been buying that from China. And now China holds the cards for, who in the world or which countries in the world will be their customers. And, there are reports, I'm not sure how widespread this is, but there have been some incidents of US government procurers intercepting shipments from China to European countries that purchase these things and buying them,
Not to mention if we're
bidding
going
it
to
up.
do, not to mention if we're going to do any vaccine production on a massive scale, we're going to need China to help with that, and we're not doing ourselves any favors by insulting them.
Exactly. And it's not just China. I mean, the United States was trying to buy that German company that developed what is a hopeful, cure, but it's way before testing and trial runs. And
Our colleague Barry Mitzman had a great story about that, and the
yes,
backstory of how that came to be and how it fell apart last weekend. Yeah. Well, thank you. It's sobering times right now.
yes.
Good to get your perspective. Thank you. And this is, as I said, the first of post-alley video talks, and we'll do more.